Thank you so much for inviting us, Dr. Don Latham and me, to talk about our research. And so we're going to be talking about our research, but we're also going to be talking about the research method, found a new research method. You know how much that meant to me. But we're working in collaboration with some other faculty from social work and also faculty from communication disorders. And it was actually our colleague in communication disorders, his name is Chris Constantino, who told us about the experience sampling method, and we're using it in our research. And I, of course, was just thrilled to find a new method that I didn't know anything about. So I started reading up on it kind of on my own, and I found out that it came from flow theory. Is anyone familiar with flow theory? Yes. You've heard of it? And this is our last spring break. I was down. Oh gosh, what was I? Tip of the world there. Key West. Geez, my brain. Excuse me if I do that. But anyway, I was walking past the window and it's like, oh, go with the flow. It's Key West, right? But I'm thinking, oh, flow. I have to get back and learn about flow and talk about flow. So it was actually developed by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who's someone in psychology, and he's the one who came up with flow theory, and he learned about it originally using like interviews, and he was interested in musicians and artists and kind of people like that. He's one of the beginning people in the positive psychology movement. So a lot of psychology is kind of pathology oriented, right? They're interested in mental illness or aberrations that people have, ways that they're mentally ill. So, but in the positive psychology movement, they're interested in what makes life better, what makes life happy. How can we improve work, improve life, and that kind of thing. So it's a more upbeat kind of research. So he developed flow theory in the 1970s, and what he was describing, what people were describing to him, was this experience that they have in life where they really get into what they're doing, and when that happens, they kind of lose their sense of self. They have a very calm feeling that comes over them. They lose sense of time, but they feel a lot of clarity. And they let go of any kind of, worries and whatever. They're just so deeply involved in what they're doing. They forget themselves, time passes, they look up and it's like, wow. So this happens. It happens to a lot of people, not only to artists and musicians. It happens to a lot of people. And by now, since the 1970s, they've done so many studies that they know this is a very common human experience that people have. People are looking at like how to create this, how to put people in these modes, because they feel like it might really make work life better, make life better. Because being in flow state is kind of a pleasurable thing. So it happens when you're engrossed in what you're doing, but it's also kind of at that edge of what you're doing. You have to be pretty skilled at it, but you also have to have some challenge there. If what you're doing is too easy for you, you're probably going to fall into boredom. If what you're doing is too hard, then you're going to get anxious and have anxiety. And both of those things work against being in a flow state. So it happens when you engage in activity that gives you enough challenge for your skills. You become absorbed. And when you're absorbed, you're totally focused, you have this sense of serenity, this sense of timelessness, a feeling of inner clarity, you lose consciousness of yourselves. And they say that this is like a state of ecstasy, but it means ecstasy in the Greek sense of just being like outside of yourself. So anybody think they felt this, that they've had this experience? Just show him. I see heads nodding. Yeah. It's really a pretty common experience that people have. So they knew that people were having this experience, and by the way, if you want to know more, this is the book that I totally recommend if you want to read more about experience sampling method. They had developed the theory, but now they needed a way to really to learn more about it. So they were interested in studying simultaneously what people do as well as their experience that they're having at the moment that they're doing something. So they wanted to bring those two dimensions together. And they're, by experience, they mean sort of the content of consciousness. So that would include things like, what you're feeling, what you're thinking, sensations you're having maybe in your body. So those are the two things that they want to bring together. And ESM was what they came up with to do this. And the first studies that were published with ESM were in 1977. And they were from students of achieved 75. I think they were both dissertations. So ESM is going to let us capture everyday life, what people do, and kind of how they feel about it. So why do you think it's so important to capture experience as it's happening? Why is that a concern? Why do you think that would be so important? Any ideas?
Because we recall things differently.
We recall things differently, right? The farther we get away from them, they change, right? Sometimes we rationalize what's happened to us. Sometimes we summarize what's happened to us, and we lose data. Sometimes what happens to us, we have to fit it into our everyday sort of beliefs, what we call cognitive consistency, and so it changes. So the closer we're able to capture the experience, the more sort of valid the report is going to be, right? Because it's before you have a chance to change it, for your mind to change it. So there are a lot of approaches that have been used over time to collect ESM data. It started with paper and pencil methods, but people still use pencil and paper, even though they don't have to. But you can have people keep diaries and things like, or paper surveys, things like that. Eventually, they started using pagers and different things to kind of alert people that it was time to collect the data. At first they might say, oh, well, do this at 5 o'clock, do this at 7 o'clock, something like that. But with pagers and other kinds of electronic devices, they're able to then randomly alert people, okay, now do the survey. So they would, again, don't have time to change what you're thinking, what you're experiencing, you're just focused on collecting what's happening at that point in time. So they use, microcomputers, PDAs, electric planners, whatever. There are great apps now where you can just put it on a phone, put everything on the phone, and that's what we use in our particular study. And I'll show you something about that some more in a second. So ESM is, again, trying to capture the content of daily life as well as how it's perceived, what the person's experience is like. It wants to make links between the context the person is in and the content of the person's mind. Like any kind of research, the questions that you're going to ask at that point in time are going to depend on what your research goals are, what your interests are. But for ESM, we're usually interested in the physical context. Where is the person at the time that the data is being collected? We're interested in the social context. Who are they with? What's going on socially at that point in time? what kind of activities are they having, or thoughts or feelings. We want to collect something about that. And then also have them do some kind of cognitive or motivational self-appraisal. That's often part of this kind of data collection as well. There are a lot of limitations associated with this particular method. It's very burdensome on respondents. They have to agree to be interrupted all the time. They have to agree to, to keep these records. So it can be difficult to recruit for this, and so there's certainly a self-selection bias when you're collecting this kind of data. So people who are willing to be, put out in this way. It's not appropriate for all populations. And you can imagine, we're not going to collect PSM data on, surgeons, for instance. I mean, there are some kinds of work you can't, interrupt. Cross guards are probably another, bad population for this kind of thing. Also, people have to have some facility with language, with reading and writing. It's expensive. You have to pay people to do this. You can probably imagine that. We paid people per survey, so they would get paid, and we would give them $5 every time they would fill out a survey. And it worked pretty well, keeping people motivated to do it. But you've got the cost of the technology. Sometimes you've got paying people for participation. The benefits are really good, though. I mean, the data is amazingly rich, and there's lots you can do with it. And the data can be reused. It's a good source of secondary analysis if you're interested in that. You can see in psychology, it is used a lot, not only to study flow, but to study all kinds of things. And a lot of their interests, I think, correlate very well with our interests in library and information science. They've done a lot of work with young people, with youth, adolescents, a lot of studies of media, a lot of gender studies, as well as just studies that we're particularly interested in flow. In our field, there are studies of flow, but strangely, not all of them, in our field broadly. There are a lot in HCI, a lot in gaming, where they've looked at flow. They're interested in flow in that regard because it's a way to keep people on a site longer, right? So if you can get somebody to your site, you can figure out how to get them into a flow state, or in your game and into a flow state, they're going to spend more time there. People want that. So business, marketing, developers, people like that are interested in flow from that perspective. They're not always using ESM, though, to study it, which I found really strange. But we have, in library and information science, a few studies. The first three here are actually interested in flow, and the fourth one just uses ESM data to collect the data. That first study, the St. Jean et al., they were studying information behaviors and goals on people using the internet kind of broadly, and they were looking at what people were what they liked to do best on the internet, and what they were most confident using on the internet, and what was giving them the most satisfaction on the internet. Now, the most interesting, people said, the most interesting thing to do on the internet was to be engaged in multimedia and social media. The most confident, they felt the most confident using news websites and social media. They had the most satisfaction using news websites, multimedia, and social media. But there was one activity that they just hated. The least interesting, the least satisfying, the least confident with, the least everything. Can you imagine that might have been something we could do online that we all probably, everybody in this room does it. I don't know how, if you hate it as much as they do. Can you imagine what that is? Bill paying? No, but that's pretty good, isn't it? It was search engines. Search engines. People strangely don't like search engines. I love the title of this one. Can research send me high? Isn't that cute? So they were trying to see if people could get into flow doing research. Have you ever gotten into flow doing research? But they were looking at it in terms of, working with the librarian and bringing up people's information seeking skills. There's a lot of problems with that particular piece of research. And only one of the students that they were working with actually reported getting into a flow state. But they did feel like there was a trend where, as information literacy skills increased for students, and they got more confident that they were more likely to move toward a flow experience. This one was looking at positive mood in digital gaming, and that one was kind of interesting because what they found was that people would get into flow when playing digital games, but it made them like sort of really cranky. They would their mood would just be horrible. People had a more positive mood. The thing that put people into a positive mood in digital gaming was gaming with other people, making it more of a social kind of thing. And but flow worked completely against that. And then the last one was looking at emotional labor in the library workforce. And emotional labor is about that difference. It's when you have to sort of control how you behave because you need to meet the expectations of your employer and those that you're at. So, if you're have a user in the library that is just bugging you, you can't show it, right? You have to still be polite. You have to kind of follow the conventions, the social conventions of the situation. And people actually have distress from that sometimes. It's and they call that emotional labor. That it can make your work stressful. It can lead to burnout. It can make you more cynical about people. And they found out all those things were true. But they also found out that it also added to people's sort of sense of professional efficacy. That they felt good in that respect, that they were able within themselves to, rise above that and still help patrons, still do their jobs, not yell at their bosses, things like that. So, like I said, we're using this to study. In our collaboration, we were interested in how ICT are being used by child welfare workers in rural areas of North Florida, and we decided to use ESM as a way to find out, how they were using ICTs and what kind of experience they were having at the time that they're using the ICTs. We've learned since a little bit about child welfare workers and what they do. These people have incredibly important jobs. You can see they have a lot of responsibility. They're keeping children safe, making sure they're in safe environments. There's a lot of, they deal with a lot of trauma and stress that other people are experiencing, so they have kind of a secondary trauma experience that goes with this particular job. It doesn't pay very well, and there's huge turnover. Some places in Florida, the turnover in this job category is 80%. It's just massive. And I was really surprised to learn that to do this job, you don't have to have a degree in social work. I always thought social work jobs needed a degree in social work, but it's not true. These people have bachelor's degrees, but they have them in a wide variety of fields. I think because the jobs are so hard to fill, honestly. So you have people from English or biology or whatever coming in and working as child welfare workers. The significance of this research is mostly that very little is known about it. We know that ICTs are being used in the workplace, but we don't know how. We don't know what the outcomes are, if it has any effect on families that they're working with. Does it make things better? Does it make things worse? There are some studies that say that the systems used, like the client systems used in social work, need some improvement. But this study, it looks like it really is the first one that's going to employ ESM to study the situation, study this population. So it will end up informing not only social work, but also information studies, which is kind of neat. So our research purpose, we're trying to find out how they're using ICT. And we're using actually multiple methods in this research. All we're really talking about today is the ESM piece, but there's actually a pre-interview that we did that took about an hour. We had them fill out a checklist where they told us some demographic things about themselves, and also they rated their comfort across the number of ICTs. And then we did a preliminary semi-structured interview with them, and then a training where we downloaded the application that we would need for the ESM onto their phones and showed them how to use them. Then we collected ESM data for a week, 7 days, 7 full days. We wanted the work day, but they also sometimes are on call or have work on the weekends, so we did it all days of the week. And they were pinged by five times a day. And that was randomized between the hours of 9 in the morning and 9 at night. We didn't want to wake them up. We didn't give them a chance to get to work and have a cup of coffee before we started messing with them. But other than that, the pings were 5 times a day. Now, when they got pinged, they had about an hour to respond, because you were saying it can be a problem interrupting people. So if they get pinged and they're working with a family, we really can interrupt that work. So we thought if they had up to an hour to answer, that was one way to get around that particular problem. And then after they had completed the ESM, we did a final interview where we talked to them. Again, now that you really have this ESM experience, has it changed your thinking about how you're using ICTs? We were also interested in what they thought about the ESM process, being a participant in that. These are our research questions for the ESM. So how are they using ICT, but we're also interested in their level of comfort with ICTs and how useful they find the ICTs to be. So the number of participants in ESM studies tend to be really small. We had 10 in ours, 10 participants, 9 women, one man. It's another profession that's mostly female. You can look at your sample with this method as being the participants, the people, or you can look at your sample as being the individual responses that you give, so that even though you have small number of participants, the actual amount of data you have, it really balloons rather quickly. So you can imagine, 10 people, being pinged those many times a day. You end up with something like 350 data points. So the data does really rack up quickly. but it's not unusual at all for sample sizes even smaller than what we had. This is the Packle app that we use. You see the little dog. So I said ping, but when it goes off, it barks. This little dog bark. Oh, I have to answer a survey. And it works with Android and it works with Apple phones. So that was another thing that we had to ask, screen for with our particular, because, do you have a smartphone? Because they didn't have a smartphone, they couldn't participate. But everything was coded onto this, so not only would it, alert you that it's time to plug the data, but then it would present the survey, and they can answer the survey right there on their phone and then send it. And of course, that's great because it's all, the data's already in electronic format, and everything is actually anonymized or de-identified. The people are de-identified, so you don't know, what phone it came from when you get the data. So those are two kind of nice things about this, particular method. The other kind of considerations things you want to think about here are, very similar to, again, to what you would do with a survey. You want to keep your data collection short. They suggest 2 minutes or less. Ours took about a minute and a half to fill out the survey when they filled it out. You always want a private test right before you actually use it in your study. And we had a couple of rounds of pilot tests with the research assistants working on our group and social work students over in the social work school. But all of the things about survey construction come into play there. And I thought I'd just show you what some of our questions look like. This is to establish the physical context. This question, where are you right now? Where are you using ICT? And then questions about activities. So what kind of ICT are you using? If it's not listed, let us know. We also wanted to know specifically if they were using social media, which social media they were using. These are questions, again, about the social context. So here we were interested in who were they using the ICT to communicate with? Youth, parents, caregivers, colleagues. Were they using it to just store resources? Question?
So was this just about their work, or was this personal?
No, just work. I didn't make that clear earlier. We were interested in their ICT use at work, not in the personal lives at all. And then questions about experience. And again, we wanted to know about usefulness, and we wanted to know about their level of comfort with using the ICT. So when you get to the data analysis stage, there are really tons of ways that you can analyze the data, which is really kind of interesting. I mean, you can treat it like any survey. You could just do descriptive statistics and come up with something like that. But you can look at you can take it person by person and do kind of trend data, like over the course of the week, what happened with them. You can do comparisons across participants. You can aggregate it and look at it as group data. You can use the data you collected, which we did some of this. We have that demographic data from the checklist, so we used some of that in analysis that we did to think about the answers on the survey. One of our purposes, one of the things that we wanted to do was to use that ESM data in that final interview that we had with them. And it turns out that that's kind of a unique thing as well, that there don't seem to be any studies where people have gone back to the participants and said, what was your experience like doing this? What did you think? And so we're kind of we're interested in that aspect of it as well. I think it's Dawn's turn.
a little bit about what we've learned from doing all of this, what we've learned so far. And this is kind of a summary here, and then I want to look at some charts that we were able to put together. Actually, Chris Constantino put together for us. But generally speaking, participants were comfortable using the app. Nobody had a major problem with it. The data turned out to be very useful in going back to that second interview. Excuse me, so we were able to ask people not just about their experience going through ESM or using ESM, but also did they feel like the data we were sharing with them was representative, for instance, of a typical day, typical work day. You may or may not be surprised. For the most part, they tend to use phone, text, and email in their work. They generally reported being comfortable with the technology that they were using. They generally reported that the technology was useful for what they needed to do. And it seemed that there might be a connection, an association between comfort and usefulness in context. So we'll get into that in a little more detail in a minute. But I did want to mention one thing while we're on the topic of being comfortable. Karen Randolph, our colleague in social work, has been working with us on this project, really is the one who sort of initiated this. She came to us. She said, I'm interested in looking at how child welfare workers use ICT in their work. Because frankly, her hypothesis was, and Melissa mentioned the high turnover rate among child welfare workers, her hypothesis was that ICT might actually be contributing to that. You're getting bombarded by information, requests, people's needs in all different forms and formats. And so the ICT might actually be making the job, which is already stressful, even more stressful. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you we actually found that wasn't the case. But that was her hypothesis, and so that's kind of how we came up with some of these questions and essentially really sort of motivated the study to begin with. So I know there's a lot here, but I will go ahead and show you this. But again, this shows you the average comfort level across the different ICTs: telephone, email, text messaging, instant messaging, those kinds of things. Client information system, there's a particular product that they use in Florida, and so they were all kind of plugged into that. They use that on a regular basis. And they are pretty comfortable with it, so that was something that came up a lot, and they seem to, and it's something they use a lot. Intranet, YouTube, a little bit. They mentioned using YouTube, and this is what we learned from interviews, but they mentioned using YouTube sometimes to share something with a parent or caregiver, or even to share something with a young person about how to deal with a particular kind of situation. So it's almost a training kind of thing. Facebook came up some, and then the other one, over here, Google Docs, some people are sharing docs. So again, they seem to be generally comfortable, but they tend to be more comfortable with those kinds of things because those are the things they tend to be using. And I think that's true for most of us. We're comfortable with what we use.
What are they using Facebook for work?
That's a good question, and we sort of, again, this is something we discovered through the interviews, and also you might want to chime in here too. They will sometimes go on, if they're having trouble tracking down a parent, for instance, they'll go on Facebook to try to find out what's going on. Or in some cases, if, because these kids are under care, if you will, because there's been some issue. It may be with the child, it may be with the home, it may be some combination of the two. And so if they suspect that a parent might be engaged in some kind of nefarious activity, Facebook is one way you can sometimes find that out. And it's amazing what people will reveal, intentionally or not. On Facebook.
Pretty chaotic lives, so they can sometimes move a lot.
Right.
They don't, keep the caseworker up with the address, so that's a way to do that. There was one instance that was reported to us where they used it, and a child had run away, and they were using Facebook to try to figure out where the child was. But they will all in the interviews talk about, they'll use Facebook for that, but they don't use Facebook professionally like otherwise. They don't want to be friends with their clients. They don't write
or the caregivers, they're have very clear boundaries about that. And a lot of them aren't on Facebook personally for that reason. They don't want, someone looking them up or, getting into their personal lives.
Well, I see Snapchat, Instagram, Pinterest, so I'm guessing kind of the same kind of thing, trying to find people or trying to find a child.
Right, and, again, we were pinging people between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. No doubt sometimes people were at home and they were sort of off the clock. And although we said using ICT for work, my own suspicion is there were probably a few times where they had used ICT that wasn't necessarily for work, but they were before the meetings. But yeah, I think it's that. You have your hand up.
So my question is that related to the level of, the extent of compatibility that they had. So was it more general around these applications or these systems, or it was you have asked them specifically, for example, a level of proficiency that they have in specific things? For example, maybe I personally do not like to, do video conferencing with other people because of my characteristics, but it's not like that I'm not very, proficient or professional in working with, these video conferencing applications. Which one was your intention to capture?
So if I understand, are you asking, was it a matter of comfort or a matter of competence in using the technology?
Yeah, something.
No doubt those two things are related, but we talked about that and we decided that we wanted to ask about comfort level. When you start asking people about their sort of competence or their skill level, it becomes more complicated for a variety of reasons. So that's why we chose comfort. No question there is, I think, some connection between the two. Do you want to add anything to it?
Yeah, well, I think I agree with what you said exactly. Self-reports of competence.
It's more related to emotion and feeling that you have at that moment.
Right. And comfort doesn't necessarily mean proficiency, I would say.
Right.
People felt very comfortable using their phones, right? They have these smartphones.
Yeah.
There's a lot about those smartphones that they didn't necessarily know.
Yeah.
There's a lot of capability there that they didn't know they didn't use, but nonetheless they feel very comfortable. They're very comfortable with their phones. So.
That's a good question.
So I just wonder, so they are using separate Facebook account or professional purpose? They are not using their personal Facebook account.
Well, are you going for a personal reason?
Yeah.
Well, we didn't really ask that because we were interested in the ICT they were using for work or at work. So we didn't really get into that. I think it could be interesting to do a study and see how that compares. But we decided not to get into that piece of it because we thought it would be much more difficult to sort of tease out the data. But also at the end of the day, we weren't particularly interested in what they were doing in the personal lives. But
Because a lot of people just open their postings to their only friend.
right, exactly.
So, yeah.
And some of them may very well be doing that. But they're not using it in their professional work in terms of necessarily opening it up to clients or even other colleagues for that matter. Okay, well, let's take a look at some of the other results. This is an easier one to read. But in terms of just usefulness, far and away you can see 72% said that they found it very useful, ICT in general very useful, or useful, 27%. So that's, 99% altogether there. Same thing basically was true with comfort level. Very comfortable, 67%. Comfortable, 31%. So again, lots there. In terms of what they were using, again, email, texting, a little bit of social media, not a lot. Fax machine, a little bit, not a whole lot. By task, I think this is kind of interesting. And I labeled this by task, but it's really sort of communication with. So in general, they're communicating within the agency and for the most part with other colleagues. In other words, people that are essentially at their level in the agency. And then just behind that with their supervisor, the person that they work for, the administrator. Outside the agency, you know, different people, other professionals, other kinds of care providers outside the agency. And then caregivers, and those could include parents and caregivers. And then this was kind of interesting to me, youth, not as much. Because you would think that maybe they would be communicating with them more, it would be more of a two-way street there, but they don't seem to be, at least, again, in the sample that we got during that particular week, didn't find that nearly as much. So keep that in mind, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But ICT by location, they're mostly doing it either at work, their desk, in their office, at home, or in their car. These people travel a good bit, and these are in rural areas. And something I learned, they may actually end up having to travel pretty far in the work that they do. I mean, you would think that it maybe would be sort of something limited to their county or surrounding counties. But in some cases, they will have a child that they're working with, and they need to place that child in a foster care home, for instance. There may not be anything available in North Florida, and so they end up having to drive to Central Florida, even in some cases South Florida. But even just sort of their day-to-day work within their area, they do have a bit of a driving. So it's not surprising that they do a fair amount of work in their car. Now, we talked about ICT usefulness. This is a little bit different because we asked them about urgent situations. So we wanted to know that, you know, when we pinged them and captured some data at a particular point, were they in the process of dealing with an urgent situation at that time? Because we wondered if, you know, just in day-to-day work, you might report one level of comfort or one kind or a couple of kinds of technology that you're using, but in an urgent situation, maybe that changes. Well, turns out it didn't change really all that much. They still, in that urgent situation, reported finding the ICT useful, very useful. They reported being comfortable or very comfortable in terms of using that ICT in an urgent situation. One thing that changed a little bit, I said try to remember the chart from earlier. I'll go ahead and kind of point it out to you when you get there. They still use email, text, and phone. But in terms of the tasks, changes just a little bit. Remember with just ICT use in general, they mostly were using it within the agency to correspond with colleagues sort of at their level. Supervisor was kind of right behind that. Well, in an urgent situation, that switches a little bit. Not a lot, but it switches a little bit. And that, you know, kind of understandable. They're dealing with an urgent situation. They may need somebody to give them, well, they may need advice, but they also may need somebody to essentially make a call, a phone call, but to give advice that's kind of authoritative. You know, this is what you should do. This is what we're going to do. This is the agency behind you. So that's not a big surprise, although it's still pretty, you know, pretty close. Caregivers and outside the agency, again, doesn't change a whole lot. And then in terms of where they were using it, again, desk, office. I would have thought maybe that would have changed a little bit, and that maybe would have happened either while they're traveling or in a client's home, but not so much. They're still sort of at work in their office, or they may be at home when they're dealing with these urgent situations. So it's probably not, well, it's possible in their office. It may be a client right in front of them. They're having to deal with an urgent situation. Probably not in their home. So in terms of implications, I want to talk a little bit about implications for the way we educate people who are coming into this field. certainly at the master's level, but I think even at the doctoral level too. As we've done today, I think it's important to introduce students to this as a method, ESM as a way of collecting data. Talk about understanding or the importance of understanding information needs and practices among social workers. Some work has been done on that, but not as much as you might think. We've done work in lots of different kinds of professions, and so social work is one that's worth looking at as well. I think it's important to understand ICT use and perceptions of ICT use among various groups, including social workers. And consider how information and such information can be used to improve information programs and services. I mean, ultimately, we undertook this project, and I think anybody would undertake a project like this because we wanted to collect data that hopefully would allow us to say, okay, in order to improve their work, maybe to improve retention among child welfare workers, these are some things that could be done. And maybe some of those things were related to ICT or either improving training or providing more ICT or whatnot. And you guys might be able to think of other things too in addition to these. Can you think of other things that this kind of research might contribute to LIS education? In other words, how can we use what we've learned here or use this method or use this research design in terms of talking to students about what they might do?
Well, I think it's important to note that even at work, people are using more than just email, text, and phone, and they're using the social media, and whatever those things are. People still use fax. And so you still need to know those other things that you might not need to be a professional on it, but you need to know what they are, you need to know that they exist, you need to know the basics of some of those things.
I think we also discussed with the students about the idea of information literacy, how you can search and evaluate information not just from different sources, like how we were talking about Facebook, how Facebook could be used as an information source, and how to evaluate the information you get from Facebook.
That's a really good point, and another sort of part of the project that really kind of emerged. Well, Melissa and I wanted to build it in, and so we did. We built in some questions related to it. And even though our research questions didn't deal with this, we find it interesting, and we are sort of analyzing that data right now. And that is the whole business of what you might call information sharing. So, we were really interested in, when do you go to people for an information need, and who do you go to? And by the same token, who comes to you, and when do they come to you? And I think the information literacy piece is really important.
To kind of feed off that question, so with the chart, with the one where you had who they communicate with, does that match similar fields, or that they would communicate that much with the supervisor, that much with other coworkers, and that much with kind of outside agencies? Because you wonder if part of the burnout is that they're having to communicate so much with other people to do their job.
I think that's a really interesting question. I mean, I don't know the answer to that question. I think it would be interesting to compare across different, I think you could think of other kinds of, for lack of a better term, service professions or high-pressure professions.
Yeah, and see if, hey, are these rural North Florida workers having to communicate with their supervisor much more? Like, do those columns look different? Are they having to communicate with outside agencies more? Are they having to communicate with interagency more?
I think that's a point.
And maybe that's where part of that burnout comes in, because they're constantly having to communicate with someone else to get what they need.
It could be, and so in that case, the ICT facilitates the communication. That's not necessarily a problem in itself, but the motivation or the impetus for the communication is there.
So my question is related to data analysis for this one somehow. So how much missing data do you receive? I mean, how many surveys that have been, sent to your participants, but they didn't respond, and how did you handle that?
There was only one piece of missing data. There was only one
So it
slide
was
that someone didn't answer. So the
Pretty amazing, although we did pay them.
well we paid them, and these are people who they don't make very much money. You know, I mean, they really don't make very much money. And so, you know, $5 a ping or a bar was significant enough that they, you know, I mean, it added up. They got paid $25 for an interview, so twice, and then $5 a ping. So they left, you know, a couple $100 plus at the end of the day, and they were, you know, definitely was a motivator to.
But, you know, that, in terms of the method itself, I mean, that does raise questions about incentives, and, you know, would somebody just agree to do it and take it seriously if they didn't have any incentive? And it's hard to say, but, you know, that's certainly if you're building this into the research design, I think about that. I do have another slide I want to share with you before we wrap up. In terms of implications for LIS research, Melissa already made the point that ESN really has not been used a lot in our field, so I think there are lots of opportunities there. We could certainly use it, I think, as a way of understanding further things like user experience, user information behaviors like everyday information seeking, self-generated and imposed information seeking. That's getting back to the information literacy part, and information roles, how people participate in those and various roles that they play. You mentioned information literacy, and there it is with one bullet point. And then the social context of information, access, evaluation, and use. And I'm sure you guys could probably think of some other things too, but we're beginning to run out of time, so I didn't want to see if there were additional questions. And, references as well as some others. And we can make these slides available. Or comments.
What do you want to do next
With this?
With ESN. I'd like to do some information behavior work. I think it hasn't really been used very much in studying information behavior. I think it's sort of unnatural for that. It kind of surprised me actually to find so few applications in our own field, and particularly in the subfield of information behavior. Because all those issues of what people actually do and how they experience it, if you don't catch it, they say in situ is the word they use. Like if you don't catch it right as it's happening, you know, it does mess with the limited. It would be fascinating to have someone, you know, track people's information seeking over a week or so and see if that comes up with similar answers that we already have, or maybe changes our perceptions of it.
Some of you may know that Melissa and I are currently working on an IMLS grant that we're going to be interviewing college students in the spring about their information needs, essentially, information literacy needs. And although we don't have ESN built into that project, it seems to me that would be a natural kind of thing that we then might ask students, those students that you interview, to participate in ESN and say over the course of the week, just when you ping them at random, you know, what sort of information seeking tasks are they engaged in, or have they been engaged in the last hour or so, what they use, and so on. Because, you know, like you said earlier, people don't always remember when you talk to them about their experiences. They don't always remember clearly. They certainly don't remember everything, but they may even remember things in a somewhat distorted way. We all do that. And so being able to capture what people are actually doing, sort of when they're doing that,
Very good question. Maybe misunderstood, but these surveys are the same throughout the whole process, right? The surveys that participants receive, are they the same?
Yes, it's the same one. Oh, yeah, every time, and it pops up on the phone. So they just
right, it's the same survey.
it's always the same question.
Although you probably noticed when Melissa was giving some sample questions, depending on how you answer, it may, you know, bump you ahead in the survey or whatever. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for your attention, and if you think of things or have some suggestions later on, feel free to
Find
email
us.
us. We're happy to talk. Okay, well, thanks.
Thank you.